say to you that the science around bullying is starting to teach us that the experiences that we have, whether it's as children or as young adults, gets actually written down into our genetic code. That our genes aren't these things that are fixed in stone, like we used to believe. Even just 15 years ago, we believed basically we're going to be able to decode the whole human genome, and then there was an announcement saying, yes, we've done it. They just didn't tell you they'd only decoded 10%, the 10% that they could decode, because they had no idea what the other 90% actually was on about. It was such a complex code that they disregarded it as junk. I'm going to talk a little bit about that because recent research shows that that stuff is really important. It's where our behaviours get laid down and start to activate DNA. Now, scientists have discovered, as I've said, that there's a lot more to our DNA than we first thought. They've discovered that the junk isn't junk at all, that it's very, very useful. And they've discovered that emotion and behaviour triggers DNA and actually helps us to assemble code. Now, the research shows that this starts right back in the womb, from before we're born, and it continues right up until the day that we die. And guess what? Not one of us is exempt. Every single one of us in this room, that is true for. So right now, all of your experiences and the way you feel about things is actually having an effect on what is going to be activated or deactivated in your DNA. The influence of social networking. So that's your Facebook and your MySpace. And it's also about text messaging, because today we have the ability to send messages instantly. We actually send them before we get a chance to think about what we might be sending. And it's a powerful tool, wouldn't you agree? Email is very powerful, the internet's very powerful. But just like a gun, which is a powerful tool, do we always want to put such a loaded tool into the hands of immature children? Do we want to give them the ability to aim a verbal bullet at someone else and fire it without ever thinking about the consequences? And not just fire it at the person, but maybe get thousands of other people to watch and cheer them on. With video messaging, children can now video their bullying and become an instant sensation on the internet through an act of bullying. What if tomorrow everyone with earlobes became worthy of insult? Would we be happy about that, those of us with earlobes? Or what if it was blue eyes that became the thing that made you wrong? You see, what makes us wrong is chosen by somebody else, and it's so random that any of us could be the target. Now, we know that boys report bullying more than girls, that's the statistics. But when researchers actually observe the classroom, the playground, and the workplace, they see just as many incidents of girls and women bullying as boys and men. It's just that girls use gossiping, isolation, innuendo, discrimination more often than violence. But what we're seeing now in the current generation of 17, 18, 19 and 20-year-olds, if you give the girls enough alcohol, they start to behave violently too. Another international statistic is that the commonest age for a lot of bullying is the age of 11 and 12. Puberty hits, so you get some kids who are much bigger than other kids, so you get some kids who stand out because all of a sudden, heaven forbid, they've sprouted boobs, or they've started to get facial hair if they're a boy, or they've suddenly got taller. And it's not that the kids that get taller and bigger are always the bullies. In fact, amongst girls, the statistics show that smaller girls are more likely to bully than bigger girls. Although in boys, it's bigger and stronger boys that tend to bully the smaller ones. So it's a time where there's a lot of difference going on. There are a lot of hormones racing, and some young men and women haven't been taught how to handle those emotions and those hormones. And so when they erupt in an immature way. Because whatever we haven't developed in our personality can overrun us in moments of stress. So the best thing that we can do for our children as they approach puberty is to give them some strategies around handling those strong emotions. They also become quite self-conscious at that age too, so they're more likely to react if someone points out a difference in them. You see, children do what we do, not what we say. Our example is the most powerful thing that we can do to teach our children. Because we often think, poor victim of bully, and we don't really have much empathy for the bully, do we? But they had to learn that behaviour somewhere, and very often children who bully have been bullied, They just might have been bullied by an adult. The stats are that 6 out of 10 high school students who bully end up with a criminal record by age 24. Let me just say that again. 6 out of 10 teenage children who bully end up with a criminal record by the age of 24. What if they get away with it and it's always unchecked and they go into the workforce? Who do they become? They become the workplace bully. And we know that the effects for both the bully and the victim are higher rates of depression, anxiety and mental illness. So it is definitely a serious subject. Now you might ask, why is it that some children who get bullied don't go on to have depression and anxiety? And why do some people who bully not go on to be criminals? Well, there's some pretty interesting research and it all has to do with our genes. So I'm closing that loop on that one. Now, according to US and British researchers, there is a gene variation that they've discovered within that 90% of the so-called junk DNA, which makes someone more predisposed to experiencing depression and anxiety. However, there is a rider on that. They must have experienced some form of bullying when they were children for it to switch on. Isn't that interesting? So how did they prove this? Well, Dr. Karen Sugden from King's College in London took 2,000 same-sex twins and she tested them genetically, and they had them tested psychologically, and found which children had this gene variant. And basically they tracked all of the children, all 2,000, and when they were 12 they retested them. Now the children who had experienced bullying between the age of 5 and 12 and had the gene activated, and those children were already showing signs of depression and anxiety. Whereas children without the gene variant who were bullied didn't seem to have the same long-lasting effects. But the really interesting thing is that children who did have the gene but were not bullied weren't showing traces of depression and anxiety, so the gene didn't switch on. Now they think that there's a similar gene for aggression, and they're looking for that right now. And it might be that children who bully, who have that gene and never learn to handle their aggression, switch on a highly aggressive gene which makes them react more violently to situations they can't control.